"I'll only break your heart," he warned, but I was already his. The research station orbited a dying star, and nobody expected the alien ship to arrive without warning. Commander Kyle Harris stood in the observation deck when the sensors screamed their alert, and his coffee spilled across the metal floor as the massive vessel materialized from nowhere, and the crew scrambled to their posts while he stared at the impossible sight before him. The ship was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, and its surface seemed to shift between solid and liquid like mercury caught in zero gravity, and no known species had technology like this. "We should run," Katie Monroe said from her position at the communications array, and her hands shook as she checked the readings again and again. Kyle shook his head, because running meant dying in the cold void, and their little station had no weapons worth mentioning, and nowhere to hide in the empty space between stars. "Hail them," he ordered, and his voice stayed steady, even though his heart hammered against his ribs. The response came instantly, and the view screen filled with her face. She was tall and elegant, with skin that shimmered like starlight on water, and her eyes were too large and too bright and held depths that seemed to contain entire galaxies, and her features were almost human but wrong in subtle ways that made his breath catchy. "I'm Zafira," she said, and her voice resonated through the speakers like music from an instrument that had never been invented. "And I come seeking asylum." The words hung in the air between them. "Asylum," Kyle repeated, and he glanced at Katie, who looked just as confused as he felt. "And what are you running from?" "Death," Zafira said simply, and something in those galaxy eyes flickered with genuine fear. "And my people hunt me because I refuse to let your species die." The next hours passed in a blur of impossible revelations. Zafira came aboard alone and unarmed, and she moved through their corridors like liquid shadow, and everyone who saw her stopped and stared because she was the most terrifying and most beautiful thing they had ever witnessed. In the briefing room, she told them everything. Her people called themselves the Archons, and they had watched humanity for centuries from the spaces between dimensions, and they had decided that humans were too dangerous and too unpredictable and too filled with potential chaos. "The council voted for extinction," she explained, and her fingers traced patterns in the air that left glowing trails of light, "and I stole the codes that would have allowed them to collapse your sun." And Irankel felt sick because she was describing genocide as casually as someone might describe bad weather. "Why save us?" he asked, and he needed to understand what would make someone betray their entire civilization. Zafira looked at him and really looked, and he felt like she was seeing every secret he had ever kept. "Because I have watched you," she said softly. "And I have seen humans fight impossible battles and lose everything and still find reasons to laugh, and you create beauty in the darkness, and you love so fiercely it burns across dimensions, and my people forgot how to do any of those things. Millennia ago, the station fell into an uneasy routine." Zafira stayed in the lower observation deck where she could see the stars, and Kyle found himself drawn there despite every logical reason to stay away. She was dangerous and alien, and had brought the threat of annihilation to their doorstep, and yet he could not stop returning to that room. "You should fear me," she said one night without turning around, and she always knew when he arrived before he made a sound. "I do," Kyle admitted, and he moved to stand beside her at the window, "but I keep coming back anyway." She turned to face him, and the starlight made her shimmer. "I will only break your heart," she warned, and her voice carried sadness that seemed older than Earth itself. "And my people will come eventually, and when they do, everyone near me will die, and you should send me away. While you still can." Kyle should have listened, and every regulation and every ounce of common sense screamed at him to put distance between them. And yet when he looked at her, all he could think was that she had sacrificed everything to save people she had never met. "I was already his," Katie said later when she found Kyle staring at nothing in the mess hall, and her tone was gentle but worried. "And you have that look." "What look?" he asked, like someone who just realized they fell off a cliff. She replied, "And just be careful, Kyle, and we do not know what she really wants." But Kyle thought he did know. He saw it in the way Zafira watched the crew interact, and the longing in her eyes when she observed their casual touches and easy laughter. And she was alone in a way that no human could truly understand, and she had given up her entire world. They began spending more time together. Zafira taught him about the spaces between stars and showed him tricks of light and gravity that made physics textbooks look like children's drawings. And Kyle taught her about music and showed her how to laugh without it sounding like breaking glass. She learned quickly and adapted, faster than should be possible. And sometimes Kyle forgot she was not human until she did something impossible, like walking through walls or stopping time for a handful of heartbeats. "Do you regret it?" he asked one evening, and they sat together in the observation deck sharing a meal that Scifi could not actually eat but pretended to anyway. Saving your species, she considered the question carefully, and every day. "I think about what I lost, and my family will have disowned me by now, and my name will be struck from every record, and I can never go home." But she smiled, and it was sad and genuine. "And every day I also think about all the humans who will grow up and fall in love and create art and explore the universe because they are still alive, and no, Kyle and I do not regret it." 3 months passed before the Archons came. Their ship appeared like a wound in space, and alarms shrieked through every corridor, and the crew rushed to emergency stations while Kyle ran to find Scifi. Stood in the observation deck, and her skin had gone dark like storm clouds, and she looked at him with those impossible eyes. "They found me," she said, and there was no surprise in her voice. "And you need to evacuate now and take everyone far from here, and maybe they will be satisfied with just—" Meckel grabbed her hand, and her skin felt like touching electricity. And like Heli said, the first attack nearly split the station in half. Metal screamed and bent, and the artificial gravity failed in sections, and Kyle held onto Scifi as they tumbled through a corridor that had become a vertical shaft. Katie's voice crackled over the emergency channel. "And we cannot fight this, Kyle, and we have to surrender." "Oh," Kyle said, and he looked at Scifi. "And we run." They made it to the escape pods with half the crew, and Scifi did something with her hands that made the remaining station systems overload, and by them precious seconds, Kyle piloted their pod like a maniac and pushed the engines past every safety limit, and behind them the Archon ship pursued with terrifying patience. "This will not work," Scifi said quietly. "And they are faster and stronger, and they will catch us. Then we make them choose not to." Kyle replied, and his mind raced. Through impossible options, he set course for the nearby planetary system, and dove toward the largest gas giant, and the Archon ship followed, and Kyle took them into the atmosphere where the pressure would crush any normal vessel. Scifi laughed, and it sounded almost human. "You are insane," she said with something like wonder. "I know." He agreed, and the pod shook violently as they plunged deeper. "And now show me what you can doze." Scifi closed her eyes, and her whole body began to glow. The pod's hull should have collapsed under the pressure, but her power wrapped around them like a shield, and Kyle flew blind through storms that could swallow moons, and the Archon ship tried to follow. But its advanced technology meant nothing in the chaos. When they finally emerged on the other side, Katie was crying with relief over the radio, and the Archon ship was gone. They drifted in empty space while the crew assessed damage and calculated their chances of reaching the nearest colony, and Kyle sat with Scifi in the tiny pod and held her hand while she trembled from exhaustion. "You saved us again," he said. She looked at him, and her eyes were dim, but still beautiful. "I told you I would break your heart," she whispered. Kyle leaned closer until their foreheads touched. "You already have," he admitted, and I do not care. Because loving her was terrifying and impossible and completely illogical, and he had fallen anyway, and there was no going back from this. The pod limped toward civilization, and behind them the stars burned cold and indifferent. And somewhere in the dark the Archons plotted their revenge. And none of it mattered, because Kyle had found something worth fighting for. Scifi had saved humanity, and Kyle would spend whatever time they had left showing her that some humans were worth saving too. Even if it broke his heart, and even if it ended in fire, and even if the whole universe said it was wrong, he was already hers, and that was enough.